Hello again, I'm Professor Reboot, and in this video I'm going to show you how to conduct in-text citations using APA 7th edition style. You will notice that this paper comes pre-populated with an introductory paragraph that includes a thesis and a thesis map. For more information on how to create that, please watch my video on the creation of a thesis statement and a thesis map. Now, in this video we're going to focus on the structure of an APA 7th edition style in-text citation for student papers. Now, there may be slight variations for professional APA 7th citation style. So if you're planning to publish in a peer-reviewed or scholarly journal that uses APA 7th style, you will want to review a citation style guide about professional usage. This is strictly for student use. First, let's discuss the types of things that you would cite in a research paper. You would want to cite quotations, paraphrases, or summaries. And quotations, paraphrases, and summaries are really just the way that you refer to content that is not your own. When in doubt, cite. In other words, you may think that you have information that is your own knowledge, but the reality is, unless you created that knowledge uniquely from your own body, thought, mind cycle, it's not actually yours. For example, I remember reading an article ages ago about the fact that people had a bigger fear of public speaking than they did of death. If I were to write that here in this paper, if I were to say, just because I remember that fact from years ago does not make it my original research. I would actually have to hunt down something that validates that claim because I am not the one who conducted the study. And even if I was the one who conducted the study, if I published that study, I would still have to cite it even though it's my own research. So for all intents and purposes, you will want to cite anything that is a claim. Claims include, but are not limited to, data, statistics, and research findings, theories, claims, models, definitions, charts, infographics, videos that you might find on the web or large-scale production videos, class lecture materials, including PowerPoints or lectures themselves where the instructor is speaking to you either in video format or live in a classroom, and interviews that you conduct between yourself and an expert. Now, how you cite those in your bibliography will vary depending on the source type. So if you have not already reviewed my videos on how to identify your source type so that you can ensure you are citing each source correctly, please stop now and watch that video. Before we get started, one note of warning. I have recently published research on applying information literacy from the Association of College Research Libraries to generated chatbot or large language model AI. This is a critical piece of information. AI is created to provide you what is statistically likely to be true, not what is factually true, which means if you are using AI in any way to construct your paper, not only are you engaging in an act of plagiarism, most likely, but you are also fundamentally risking plagiarism by accident because AI will likely generate a citation that is incorrect unless you know exactly what a citation should look like in your formatting style based on the source type you have. So I strongly advise you to learn first how to identify what type of source you have and then engage in your citation style. As you cite things in APA, you will begin to notice that APA puts emphasis on the time that the research was conducted or the time that the content you are referencing was created. That is because APA is more interested in the recency of research. So to begin, let's start by citing a book that has one author. If that book with one author is digital, you absolutely will include the URL or sometimes a DOI, which is like a document reference number. However, anytime you get information from the web, you need to include the URL in your citation. Now, APA Citation Style Guide Guide being the keyword may tell you that you do not need to include a URL for everything that you cite. It is important to know that your professor or the institution or the publication you are writing for has the final say on what you have to include in your citations. So if you happen to be writing a paper for me, you absolutely must include your URLs in your bibliographical citation. In in-text citations, that's very rare because in-text citations are designed to help you get from the note in the body of your paper where you used that research to the place in your bibliography where the full text is listed. Now let's assume that you are first citing this book by Aristotle. Nicomachean Ethics of Aristotle by Aristotle himself, with an introduction by J.A. Smith, is located on Project Gutenberg because it is currently in the public domain. Now, this public domain English translation of a multi-thousand-year-old text does not have page numbers, as you can see. Now, in APA formatting style, if you are referencing a source that is HTML derived but does not have page numbers and is text-based, you do need to include the paragraph number. So you would start with the top paragraph and you would count 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on until you have the paragraph number that you are citing from. Whether you are citing a quotation, paraphrase, or even a summary of text, you would need to know the paragraph range for a book like this. And when we cite it, we always cite the author themselves, not the translator, not the editor, but the actual person who created this content. And this content is Aristotle's work, even though it happens to be translated into English. So here, I want to take a quote. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy it because I am using this quote in good faith, and it is from the 4th paragraph. So I'm going to remember that for when I write my citation. And there are 2 ways that I would introduce a citation. So whenever you introduce a citation, you need to use what is called a signal phrase. Now, your signal phrase could include the name of the author or institution that authored the content you are referencing, or it could just fold the quotation into the body of your own sentence. So for this example, I'm going to name the author himself in the signal phrase, according to a classic, Aristotle. Because I have named the author, I need to put the date of publication. Now, I happen to know from memory that this is approximately 350 BCE, but I also have to put the date that it was translated, which I noticed on Project Gutenberg's page listed 2005. So that would refer to translated works. Let's say, though, that Aristotle is a regular guy that just happens to have written this in 2005. If I did not have a translation date, I would just put the date of publication for the original resource. So for now, I do know that this source does have an original date, so I need to list both dates in the production of my in-text citation. Now, an in-text citation has 2 parts when I list the name of the author or the institution in the signal phrase. The next part, I put the quotation marks and put my quotation in. Notice how I do not put the punctuation inside the quotation marks. That is because a citation belongs to whatever it is I am referencing. And so I show that by putting it in the body of the sentence that I am using. So now I'm going to end this because this is the end of my sentence. And it was from paragraph 4, so para.4. According to Aristotle, and here you have the date, quotation, and then the end paragraph and the paragraph number. Now let's say I want to cite a book that has page numbers. Here you see an example of a book that is in the public domain located on the Internet Archive. Much like Project Gutenberg, Internet Archive strives to preserve books both for free library loan, so there are more modern books that you can obtain by signing up with a free account, and you can check out a book sometimes for a 1 hour at a time, sometimes for a 24-hour period, or you can look at books that are in the public domain like this Guide to Normal Grammar that was published in the 19th century, 1873, by Stephen W. Clark. And if I'm citing this source in text, I know that it has page numbers. So I'm going to go ahead and just flip to a page that might have content on it I want to cite. So here we have the very basics of structuring the grammar of a sentence. And for those unfamiliar, this over here actually refers to a somewhat antiquated method of teaching grammar where we used to diagram sentences to demonstrate the parts of a sentence in English. This was actually a very effective way to learn grammar. So for those of you that remember diagramming sentences, lucky you. For those that do not, I actually recommend you look at how to diagram a sentence because it can only help your writing structure. But let's say for now we are citing page 13 of Clark's book as it appears on this website. Now, the first thing I need to remember is the URL, because when I get to my reference page, I am going to need to list not only Aristotle's work, but also this new work by Clark. So here I'm going to refer instead to page 47 because it actually includes a footnote from the author about a grammatical construct. And it's talking about intransitive verbs versus transitive verbs. And it's referencing a verb used in this particular passage where one word was is actually being used intransitively, but the author of this book believes it's meant to be used in the transitive case. If you're not familiar with those grammatical terms, don't worry. Right now, I'm just showing you how to cite in text. So this is from page 47. So I'm going to say a paraphrase of what we just read. Now, in this case, I have paraphrased what Clark was saying at the bottom of that page, which again was page 47, about recognizing transitive versus intransitive verb constructs. And it is very important that your paraphrase or even your summary is as close as possible to what the author was trying to convey without actually using so many of the same words that it would have been better to just quote them in the first place. So now I write the author's last name for the first part of my in-text citation. I need to know the year this was published, which again was 1873. So next is 1873 for the year published, and then P for page 47. Now, what about when you are citing something that does not necessarily have a clearly identified author? Now, generally speaking, all citation styles are looking for the author to be listed first. However, your in-text citation, again, always matches the first part of your reference citation. And this particular source that I want to cite from NOAA, or that would have what we call an institutional author. And that institutional author is here, National Centers for Environmental Information, or the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. So in this case, NOAA, the first time I reference them, I will list out the entire name of the source. And if I reference this source again, I can reduce it to NOAA in my in-text citation. But the first time, I have to produce the full name. Now, this global report was published in June of 2025, so it is fairly recent. We're going to quote here. And in this case, it's a little tricky because you have this graphic, which may make you think that's a paragraph, but it's not. So technically speaking, this is coming from the second paragraph. So let's see how we would in-text cite that. I'm going to go ahead and move to a new paragraph. We'll assume that I've provided a transition statement that allows you to link the last idea to this one. And now I'm going to reference this. Okay, as you can see, I folded this quotation into my own sentence. And that is how you signal a quotation. You want to wrap it up in your own sentence to provide a context to your reader. And in this case, remember, I need to list out the entire name of the institutional author. So an institutional author, again, is not an individual author. I'm not able to identify a specific person who wrote this document. So I would have to list NOAA as the author. And again, we know it's 2025. and paragraph 2. Now let's say you are citing an academic or peer-reviewed source. Peer-reviewed sources are the highest level of research that you can cite in any academic paper. Now this is actually in APA format, and I can tell because it has an abstract. Now student papers in APA do not require you to produce an abstract, nor should you ever cite an abstract in the body of your paper. You want to cite the paper itself. So let's say we are citing this human-made aerosols section here for our quotation. I'm going to need to count the paragraphs, so let me just count them backwards and then I'll invert the number. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and it actually is part of the abstract, but let's pretend that it's not. Just for the sake of argument. So we would say it is paragraph 9 rather. But I did notice something as I was scrolling through. I have the option to view the PDF. Now you might think, I'm looking at the web page. Why not just cite the web page? It's right there in front of me. Well, what if I'm citing the last paragraph? I would have to count every paragraph on this page in order to get the paragraph. And in fact, the PDF will show me a paginated version of the same source. And then I would only need to list the page number. So much easier. You can get peer-reviewed resources in PDF or EPUB format from your library databases. And for more information on how to conduct research, please watch my video on research conduction. Now, this particular article has many authors. Now, there are rules and guidelines about how many authors you would list in text when you're referencing. If you have more than 3 authors, you need to list et al., which means and others, to indicate those authors in text. If you were to put in parentheses all of these last names, you would lose your reader before they even finish the citation. So that's why in-text citation has you truncate the number of authors you list. So because this work has more than 3 authors, I would list Hansen et al. As the first part of my in-text citation. And as I suspected, this PDF does have page numbers. So when I go to cite whatever I decide I am going to use, which is this sentence right here, from page 11, notice how I've paraphrased or summarized what I found in this article. And now I'm going to put the author's last name. The first author listed actually very much matters. So if you will recall, Hansen is the first author listed. Generally speaking, authors are listed in the order of their research level or their credibility level or who was the lead researcher. So it is actually important to list them in sequence. And the way that I list it in text may not fully match how it's listed in the bibliography because there are so many authors here. I would actually have to count them when I get to the reference page. And then based on the number of authors there are, that tells me how I would structure the bibliography. That'll be in another video. But do remember that this has several authors and you will need to count them in order to get to that reference point. So I know Hansen is the first author, and I just need to find a date for this publication. January, February of 2025. Perfect. So now I've put Hansen et al. And others, 2025, and then it's from page 11. Just as before, author's last name, although because there are more than 3 authors, in this case I put et al., meaning and others, and year published and the page. Now, what happens if you're going to cite 2 sources by the same author? You actually have to list those sources by distinguishing which one is which. So both of these are blog articles from the same author, Robert Smith. Now, let's say I am paraphrasing each of them, and I know I am paraphrasing the 3rd paragraph in this article and the maybe the second paragraph in this article. So when I do this, I need to distinguish both of these sources, and I also need to note what date they were published. Now, I happen to remember that they were published fairly recently. So this was March 13th of 2024, and this one is November 20th of 2024. So let's see how we would cite two different articles by the same author. Remember, when you get to your reference page, you will also have to distinguish which is which. So you do that by assigning letters. So in this case, we would say, now in this case for the first article, I have summarized essentially the entire article. So I'm not going to need to list a paragraph number here because I have summarized it. So now that I've summarized this text, I first give the author's name, and then I give the date, which was 2024, actually 13 Mar 2024, and then I put A, because I put A next to the year it was published to signify that this is the first of two sources by the same author that I am referencing. And then in the second reference, this time I'm actually going to reference the author and use a quote. Notice how I put 2024B. Even though I've already listed the author's name, I need to differentiate when the reader gets to the reference page which citation came from which source. And now I'm going to quote the section, take the period out, and put my paragraph number in, because this time I'm quoting 1, 2, 3, third paragraph. What if you want to cite a YouTube video or a video that you find generally on the web? Now, citing media can be slightly different than citing something that is text-based. For instance, you have no paragraph numbers to reference. So how would you do that? Now, remember how sometimes you will have an institutional author. In the case of a YouTube video, generally it will be the channel name that indicates the content creator or the first part of your in-text citation. So in this case, the video we're referencing is Academic Writing a Thesis and Thesis Map with Professor Reboot. Professor Reboot would be the reference point, and 2025 is the year that it was produced. So I might say, now in APA 7th, there is no indication that you need to list the timestamp, whereas in MLA 9th you do. So in APA 7th, you would just list the channel name, or in this case, an institutional author, and then the date of publication, the date that it was uploaded, or the date that you see on the channel page. So that's how you would cite in-text media. And again, of course, when you get to the reference page, Professor Reboot would be the first part of that reference citation, because all of these citations are designed to lead you to the full citation. So Hansen et al., I would be looking for Hansen in that reference page. Now, lastly, sometimes you will want to cite course-related material, and depending on the course-related material you are citing, you may or may not need to cite it both in text and in the body of your paper. For instance, if you are citing a verbally given lecture, meaning a lecture that was not recorded, because a recorded lecture has a URL, but a lecture given in class where someone, an expert, is speaking to you, that is what we call personal communication. And the way that we cite personal communication in APA 7th is it only goes in text, and it does not go on your reference page. So this is the one time you will have an in-text citation that is not followed up by a full bibliographical citation at the end of your paper. However, you will indicate that it was personal communication in the way that you in-text cite it. So, according to a lecture, naturally it will get old if you keep using the same methods, but of course I'm demonstrating here. So according to a lecture by Professor. So in this case, I am citing a lecture that was provided in class with my professor. So I'm going to use their first initial and their last name. I'm actually going to write the phrase personal communication And then I'm going to list the date the actual lecture transpired. And that concludes how I would cite personal communication. Personal communication also includes interviews that you conduct with an expert where you speak with them directly on the phone, over a Zoom call, in real life in their office. It includes email correspondence, letter correspondence, anytime you communicate directly with an expert. Now, other course materials, as you can see, have different methods of citation if you're citing a PowerPoint slide or course packs that appear in the course. Sometimes courses use something called open educational resources, such as textbooks that appear online in full text format. In any case that you are citing any content that has a paginated version of the source, like an open educational resource book, you always want to try and cite the full text version that has page numbers. Anything else is going to be frustrating for you to try and find the paragraph numbers or to make sure that you cite it accurately. And just as a reminder, when it comes time for you to create your reference page, remember that you do still maintain the structure of double spacing, and references is centered on the page. And then you would list the first alphabetical reference in your list and list that out with a hanging indentation. There will be more about that in a future video, but it is very important that you note that the way that you cite a bibliographical citation should refer back to the in-text citation, because the goal is to help your reader connect the dots between the research in your paper and the research in full, should they wish to go off and find the research you conducted and expand on it for their own research. Now that's how you cite in-text APA 7th. Thank you for watching.